Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. Before I start, I'd just like to disclose that this is joint work with several of my colleagues, one of whom, Luke Rasmussen, is here today in the audience, and that the project is supported with funding from the National Institutes of Health. So I want to put this in context a little bit because I know it may seem a bit out of place to talk about word and reproducibility in the same sentence and try to marry them. So I want to think a little bit about my role as a statistician or an analyst. And usually we have an investigator or a client or a collaborator who has some data. And maybe we're part of that data generation and capture process, maybe not. But we often take that data, conduct our analyses, generate a report. And for that step, things like R Markdown or knitr are incredibly transformative and ideal for the reproducibility of our workflow. And so hopefully we have a happy investigator or client, receives this beautiful report, and everything's good. Somebody comes back in a year with questions, we still know what we did. Somebody comes back with updated data, it's no problem to rerun it. However, the reproducibility, at least to our knowledge in this workflow, only exists in the middle of the step. And so I asked the question, what if we have greater responsibilities and involvement? And in particular, this is true in my world. I am a collaborative biostatistician, and I work a lot with clinicians and basic scientists. And these are the places they want to publish: New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, Science, Lancet. Clinical and basic science journals, all of whom say you pretty much need to submit your document in Word, preferably or required. And in part, that's because a lot of their publication workflows are actually structured around Microsoft Word. So as everyone knows, R Markdown is incredible and can generate a doc file. So this is just an example here with some publicly available cohort data showing the Markdown on the left and a very nicely structured abstract on the right. The problem is this for me. I send that abstract to my collaborators, and this is what I get back. So I have two really bad choices now. I can continue on in Word, accept their track changes, change the table, all of that, but I've lost the reproducibility. It's cut off. Or I can spend my hard-earned, valuable PhD time re-entering all of their changes in my source Markdown file. I won't even ask my graduate students to do that. So what do I do? I've also tried to see if some of my collaborators might be willing to actually write in Markdown with me. As you all know here, that requires drafting documents in a plain text editor. Does anyone have collaborators that are willing to work that way? Because maybe they have friends and you can introduce them to me? Unfortunately, my collaborators, who are primarily doctors and social scientists, are not. And I really don't think this is an indication of capacity, mental capacity for them, or ability, I should say. Really, it's the case that, if I work with a pediatric cardiologist, he or she is spending his or her time in the NICU saving babies, and they don't want to take this extra step when writing a manuscript to write like this with me. So what we've done over a number of years is come up with what we think of as a complementary and very practical approach for this problem when you have to use Word for whatever reason. And it's called StafTag. And it's really a way of building on some of our collaborative tools, or our reproducible tools that we already have in R and R Markdown, but extending them to the Word environment. So what it does is it creates a link between the statistical code and the Word document. It can embed values, tables, figures, verbatim output in that Word document, but in a way that you can actually work separately on your code file and your Word document, but retain the link. So that's really helpful for me if I want to work on the code and my collaborator wants to work on the manuscript. It's actually software agnostic, so it works with R, it works with R Markdown, it works with Stata and SAS. And you can also connect multiple code files to the same document. For instance, if you have code in multiple R files, or maybe you have something in SAS or something in R, just saying. Not that I would ever do that. So I want to talk a little bit just about how it works. So you write your R and your R Markdown code. This should be a step that's familiar to anyone. You open your Word and write some or all of your text. So this is an example of a consort flow diagram for a fake clinical trial. And the yellow highlights there are numbers that we would want to fill in directly from our statistical analysis. So then what we do is we install StafTag, and it installs as a plugin in the Word toolbar. So you can see on the far right on the Word document, there's this little tab that says StafTag. And then there's some icons, and one of them says Code Files. And you click on that, and using the typical Windows interface, you connect it to the code file. Next, once that code file is connected to the Word document, you can use another interactive window from Word to identify tags or portions of output that you actually want to insert using a pop-up in Word. So what you do is you click on that icon that says tags just to the right of code files, and it pulls up your code file in an editor within the Word environment. And you can actually, I should say, edit your code file here, as well as tag pieces of it that you want to pull into the Word document. So you tag it by selecting in between the line number and the code itself. You give the tag a name, you give some formatting options for it, and then we go and insert it in the document. So where I've circled there, we click our tags button, we'd say put this tagged value here, and then in the background, Word would run R and put it in. And it can either do one value at a time, or it can do a whole batch based on your R code. So I've got a little video showing it in action here. John and Mary are fake. So here we go. We're writing our R code to do this analysis. It's all written. One of the things we're doing here is just making sure it runs, of course. Now we're over here in our Word document, and we start to write the abstract. And we get to the point where, oh, we have results to add. So we go to StafTag, and we add our code file. We say, OK, and now we're going to tag it. So we go and we say, we're going to define a tag, and we're going to find this piece that gives us the total number of people recruited so far for the trial, and we're going to save it. And we inserted it into the document. And it's pretty fast for R. So you can see we've gone along here and we've created a number of tags. And I should mention that tags don't just have to be individual values. They can be values, they can be full tables, they can be matrices, they can be verbatim output, they can be figures. So here's our proverbial problem again, but now it's going to be a lot easier to deal with. We can go through and actually track the changes. One of the things the investigator has asked here is, oops, I forgot to tell you I want a different subset for this analysis. No problem, we can go back and change this in our code. And we say, okay. We're going to go to all of our tags, all that work where somebody in the past would have had to re-enter a bunch of changes into this file. We just say we're going to update them all. Now, of course, we'd want to reread this and make sure all those results still make sense. We're interpreting them properly. But we didn't have to copy and paste or add in a lot of numbers or change them. Another place here is we can change formatting, and the way we've actually structured StafTag is that so the formatting lives both in this editor window, so we can say, okay, we actually want 2 decimal digits here, not just 1, and we can easily change that. It also has the feature that you can copy and paste tags throughout the Word document. So we needed to add the in to the title of the table here. Well, we have the total in elsewhere in the abstract. We can just copy and paste it, but it retains the link to the code file. So if that number is updated and it's different in the code file, it will pull in differently here. And then we can make changes to the figure as well as requested. So now we're going to update the figure. There we go, all done. Sent back. Okay, so a feature we didn't show there as much that I want to be sure to mention here is that in the Windows implementation, if you double-click on a number in the manuscript, it will pull up the code associated with that. And I find that incredibly helpful, for instance, when I'm writing a methods section with my colleagues, and I want to remember some of the details about that model I thought I'd never forget. I can pull that up, find them, and then I can go and put the text in the methods. What StafTag is really doing here is it's actually just using this this tag editor interface to insert very specially formatted comments into your statistical code. So it is important to note that it is making changes by bracketing the piece of code you want to insert, the result you want to insert, with some specially formatted comments that really StafTag knows how to interpret about what we're calling it, how often it should be updated, the type of result it is it a value or a table? So if you want to, it's also possible to write those in your document or your code directly rather than use this tag interface. So if anyone's interested in getting StafTag, it's freely available, it's open source, and it is evolving. It's available at staftag.org. We also have an online course that's available through Canvas, and it's just really a very short course to get people familiar with how to use it and work it, and there's little quizzes, things about making sure your operating system is compatible. We do have both Mac and Windows implementations available. For download, we do ask that you provide your email and your least secure password. Just because it's NIH funded, we have to track some information about the number of unique users we have. So we may drop that relatively soon, I hope. If you want to really get StafTag, all the source code is also on GitHub. And we are happy to have suggestions and additions to that. We are in the process, I should say right now, or Luke is in the process of extending StafTag to work with Jupyter and Python, or Python through Jupyter. A little bit just about the architecture. The idea is that StafTag reads the code and parses out the tags. It then sends those commands to whatever statistical program it needs to. It gets those individual results and then uses Microsoft Word field codes and automation to add those to the document. It's written in C# for the Windows operating system and Objective-C for the Mac OS. Some future directions. There are a ton of amazing tech-savvy tools out there that aid our reproducibility. Of course, GitHub, version control, electronic lab notebooks, Dockers and containers. Many have been mentioned today so far, and they're really exciting. One of the challenges I have with these is the same challenge I encountered with Markdown, is I don't have a lot of collaborators who say, okay, great, we're gonna write in a Jupyter notebook together, and that's how we're gonna keep track of our workflow. So we're giving a lot of thought right now about how to take those amazing tools and extend them to an even broader audience. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and attention. If you do use StafTag, we ask that you cite it. As I mentioned, it's being developed with an award from the NIH to Northwestern. We also have an email, staftag@northwestern.edu. We love feedback and recommendations, and we look for feedback and recommendations to really guide our development decisions and processes. The reason we have a Mac version, and we had a Mac version as early as we did, is that Mac users said, wait, we went in on this. With that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. Do we have any questions for Leah? You can see one over here. Okay.
Hi, yeah, just wondering about how this works for collaborators when you send the Word file. Do they need to have R installed, or does it just sort of have the numbers and they can just comment on it and send it back and that just works? Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
So if we wanted them to be able to see the code associated with a number, they would need to have R and they would actually need to have StafTag. If they don't have either one of those, it just functions like a regular Word document. So they don't actually need it. One of the things that my collaborators have been great about doing is they now understand that if they want to put a number someplace else in a manuscript, they are forbidden from retyping it. They just must copy and paste. But that was really the only thing that they had to change about their work process to make sure I kind of kept all the reproducibility. And we found it works pretty well that even if they take the Word document and they save it as something else and then they put it on their laptop, desktop because they're traveling, and then it eventually makes its way back to me, sometimes I do have to relink the code file because it's gone through all these changes in the file name, the Word file. But once I do that, everything's still there.
That's really cool.
Thank you. We've got one over here.
Sorry, I missed the beginning of the presentation. I'm over here.
Sorry.
Yeah, over here. Yeah. Would it be easy to adapt this for example, for Excel and PowerPoint as well? Just reuse some of the functionality?
We've thought about PowerPoint, especially for people in a corporate environment where I understand so much of content is delivered through a PowerPoint presentation. It's just a matter of bandwidth and funding and time, but if there are people who are interested in doing that, we are eager to work with them. Or if people think that would be important and don't necessarily have the expertise and resources to do that, let us know, because we do, and we just prioritize what people are interested in. Excel, we haven't thought about as seriously. We can put things in Excel, but we don't really think about having as much text around it in Excel, so I can't say we've done much with Excel.
Thanks.
I think we can just take one more question. One down.
He's already up.
Hi. As I understand it from your presentation, the formatting of numbers that appears in the Word document sort of lives in StafTag rather than in the R script. Was that a sort of deliberate design decision? I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense compared to R Markdown and other ways of doing it, but was that a deliberate sort of philosophical or design decision?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand. You're talking about where the formatting lives or where the number lives?
The formatting of the number, so
Yes.
whether it's got how many decimal points and which are the separators and that
Right,
kind of stuff.
I went through that a little quickly. I'm really glad you asked the question. In terms of the formatting piece, the number of digits output as a value is something that can be controlled through that StafTag dialog box. Just because if R is giving it to you with 9 digits or something, we don't really want those 9 digits showing up in our Word document. However, all the other formatting decisions, like do you want it to be red, or do you want it to be times, or do you want it to be Arial, or do you want it 16 point, those decisions all live in Word, such that if we update the content, the number changes, but the formatting is in the Word document.
I would like to take this question. Yes.
Thank you very much. So maybe this is hoping for too much, but can I just check if it works with Google Docs? And do you have any plans of making it work with Google Docs?
We've thought about it. It does not work with Google Docs right now. Part of the challenge in that is it would be a real change in our approach to have the document itself living on a server someplace and then connecting to code that is locally on the machine or on a file server that the machine's connected to. And the biggest challenge Luke and I have with that is that most all of the data we work with is protected health information or personal information, and so we can't create a conduit that could get somebody to that data. So we've certainly thought about it. If people have an interest in that, we'd love to hear about it too, because we want this to be broadly useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.